like a once every so often occasional thing. The press, of course, giving him a total pass. Here's a guy who was screaming for a year, "I'll stop this virus, I'll stop it." And then last week, well, there is no federal solution. Maybe you shouldn't have canceled Operation Warp Speed. Maybe you should be getting those testing kits ready. That's the one thing the federal government does do, is produce the testing, and he hasn't been doing it. Anyway, we're out of time. I'll be back tomorrow. Great to be back. I'll be here tomorrow, 10 a.m. to noon. Don't forget, Buck Sexton, Clay Travis next, the #1 radio show in America. Sean Hannity at 3. Then we've got Kelly at 6 and John Batchelor at 9. See you tomorrow on 710 WOR. We'll keep you ahead of COVID's unpredictable moves until we're out of the woods. We are the voice of New York. 710 WOR.
An iHeart radio station.
At 29 degrees, 12 noon. Good afternoon. I'm Jack McKinney. Just coming in, criminal sexual harassment charges against former Governor Cuomo being dropped now.
Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, January the 4th, 2022, and we are completing the Gospel according to John today. We're picking up in chapter 20, verses 24 through 31. This is the place where Jesus appears before Thomas. In the previous installment, we left off on that particular Bible study with Jesus appearing before all of the disciples. We are not told in that particular story that Thomas is not present. We could almost have the impression that Thomas was present, although now we find out he was not. Chapter 24 or verse 24 starts off with naming Thomas as Dunamis, Didymus rather. The transliteration is Diddymus, Didymus, which means twin. So this would give us the impression that maybe he had a twin brother, or he looked like one of the other disciples, a close resemblance. Either of those are possible. The tradition is that he had a twin brother. Not sure if the twin brother is also a part of this group of disciples or not. They tell Thomas that they have seen Jesus alive, and he says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." And Jesus appears to Thomas and the disciples, and Jesus says to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Then Thomas responds, "My Lord and my God." Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." All right, some things about this particular passage. First of all, the correct translation of the sentence that Jesus says, "Stop doubting and believe," is not doubting. Doubting does not appear in the Greek in this passage at all. What does appear is move from unbelief to belief. So the story does not focus on doubt or skepticism, but on the word apistos, which means faith. So move from unfaith to faith. Move from unbelief to belief. That's what the passage means. It's unfair to give Thomas the nickname Doubting Thomas, because he is no more doubtful than any of the other disciples were when Mary came and said, "I've seen the Lord." None of them believed either. And it took Jesus appearing to those disciples for them to believe. So Thomas actually comes to a quicker statement of faith than the disciples did. You'll remember that they were also fearful when this happened. Thomas is not, and immediately confesses, without having to touch Jesus at all, "My Lord and my God." So that's the first thing that I want to say about the passage. We should not call Thomas doubting. The word doubt does not appear at all, and he's no more doubtful than any of the others. It's rational to see a person die and believe that they are still dead. It is irrational, actually, to believe that that person has come back to life, especially having seen that person crucified. So it takes an act of faith to believe in something that is quite unbelievable. That's the first thing I want to say about this passage. The second thing I want to say about the passage is the notable absence of a phrase like they were hiding behind closed doors for fear of the Jews. That was said in a previous passage. Here it is not said. And again, John doesn't make any mistakes when he writes his gospel. So what I believe he is alleging is that once the gift of the Holy Spirit has been received by the disciples, which it was in the previous passage, so fear is no longer a part of their lives. Thomas' presence here in this passage, we might think that his being with the other disciples has removed his fear. We're not told anything about any fear that he might have. So the next thing I want to say about the passage is what this passage intent is. John is making it clear that there were people who had the advantage of seeing Jesus alive. They might not have been able to explain it, but they certainly came to faith that he was alive. They certainly came to faith that he is greater than any human being that they've ever met, that he is the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of God. It's easy to have that kind of faith when it is part of your experience. It's easy to have that kind of faith when you see the person. What John is saying is, but what about all the people who come after this, who do not see Jesus, did not see Jesus, will never see Jesus in the way these disciples saw Jesus, but still come to faith. And so that gives Jesus the opportunity to note that problem when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So the passage deals with this whole question of what happens after the ascension of Jesus. What happens? How do people come to faith after the ascension, after it's no longer possible to see Jesus in the flesh? And this story considers that problem. As we launch into last, I want to say the passage ends with this particular sentence. But these are written that Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Signs in the past has always pointed to the completion of the hour. And the hour, of course, is the completion of Jesus' ministry and mission, and that mission includes the death and resurrection. So, the purpose of signs in the past was always so that we could know the identity of Jesus and his relationship with God. So what we get from this particular story is that Jesus revealing himself to the disciples in the flesh was part of this confirming his relationship with God as Father. Jesus did other miraculous signs, we are told, and those would all be for the purpose of confirming his relationship with God the Father. That's also an important distinction. He's not just appearing to them, but the purpose of this appearance has to do with confirming a relationship. As we launch into chapter 21, we launch into a possible debate, strong debate. For about 18 centuries, chapter 21 was seen as a definite part of John's gospel, despite the fact that scholars noted a difference in writing style, a difference in grammar, a difference in sentence construction, and they did believe that this was an original part of the book. In more recent times, this chapter is seen as a secondary addition to the Gospel according to John, and there's still a debate with some scholars, a smaller number, in fact, believing what the church had always believed for 1,800 years, and a larger number of scholars now believing that this chapter is an addition. What would be the purpose of adding this chapter? And that would be to take up where the church is in its faith struggle post-resurrection. So it's not that somebody decided to add some fictitious stories, but it was that somebody wanted to address where the church was in its faith struggle, and added this chapter because it is a post-resurrection story. On the other hand, there are others that believe that it was always an integral part of the gospel according to John. We can divide chapter 21 into verses 1 through 14 and then 15 through 25. Afterward, it starts off afterward. Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. This would be the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a lake. He says to them, asks them if they've caught any fish. They say, no. Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. It's very important to remember the word that's used, haul, H-A-U-L. This word will be used several more times, and it goes back to things that John has previously said. When they landed, they saw a fire of coal, burning coal, with fish on it and some bread, and they knew that this was the Lord. This story contains some of the elements of previous miracle stories. Two that come to mind is the miraculous changing of water to wine at the wedding of Cana of Galilee, and the second one is the miraculous reproduction of food in the feeding of the 5,000. Both of those miracles tie into this miracle in ways. All of the resurrection appearances in John 20 are located in Jerusalem. This is the first resurrection appearance that appears outside of Jerusalem, which means that the resurrected Jesus can appear to the disciples anywhere they are before the ascension. This particular passage lists just 7 disciples, and Nathanael is listed for the first time in a long time. Nathanael has not appeared since about chapter 1, verses 45 through 50. At that time, Jesus said that Nathanael would see greater things than what he was seeing right then and there. And this serves, his appearing in this particular passage serves as a fulfillment of that prophecy. Nathanael is seeing something greater than he's ever seen before, and that is the resurrected Jesus. Most interpreters, commentators, focus on the disciples' motivation for the fishing trip and what it says about their relationship to Jesus. But this story has a more important role and function in the life of the church. Here again, it has to do with Jesus' relationship with all of the disciples and Jesus' relationship with God, and therefore our relationship with God through Jesus. The reader knows that the man on the beach, we know that the man on the beach is Jesus. The disciples do not immediately recognize him. There's an underlying irony to the question that Jesus asks to the disciples, because he asks them for food. This also reminds us of the story of the woman of Samaria, where Jesus asks her for water. She doesn't have any water. He says, but if you had asked me for water, you'd find a never-ending supply of water. He offers the living water. So this miracle story also calls to our remembrance that story there. Jesus, again, Does this mean that Jesus again is offering to the disciples a food that never ends, a sustenance that never ends? The disciples saw Jesus' glory in the abundance of good wine at Cana of Galilee. They saw his glory in the abundance of food in chapter 6 in the feeding of the 5,000. They were amazed at his interaction with the woman of Samaria. So these three stories, again, suggest to us that the same sort of emotions, the same sort of realizations, the epiphany that they had in those previous stories is confirmed once again in this story. There has been a long debate. We're told that there were 153 fish, and there's been a long debate about the significance of the 153. There was one scholar, Augustine, who suggested that 153 is obtained when all the integers from 1 through 17 are added together. I'm not sure what that even means. Then there were others that suggested that maybe the number should be read allegorically. Augustine proposed that the number was a symbol of the Trinity. Others suggested that it had some sort of allegorical interpretation. Maybe the 157 were important numbers, or maybe if you added 157 together, you get 9, and 9 is 3 times 3, which is the Trinity times 3. How about this? Somebody back there counted the fish. There were 153, and he reported it. It's that simple. I don't think there's any symbolism in the number, but it has certainly occupied the imagination of people for a long, long time. All right, going back to that word helko, which means to haul or to be drawn. That's another possible definition of the word. In chapter 12, verse 32, Jesus says, no one can come to the Father unless drawn. No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father, hauled by the Father. Another place, Jesus says, and when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself, or haul all people to myself. So when we get that they couldn't haul the net in, or that they did haul the net in, it was difficult to do. Again, that word should remind us of other places where that word was used, and in each case, it was having to do with drawing people to God, drawing people to Jesus. So here, the story should also remind us that we are being drawn to Jesus through this story. All right. In verses 15 through 25, it's a very significant story, and there are so many levels of meaning in it that we could spend probably all day just talking about these 10 verses. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Then dropping down, he does this 2 more times. Then dropping down, he says to Peter, I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. All right, so let's just deal with those 2 parts of the story. The first part of the story gives, remember, when Paul is standing in the court, or Peter is standing in the courtyard, he's asked 3 times if he is one of the disciples, and 3 times he says no. So here he is given an opportunity to renounce that those sayings, that denial. He's given 3 opportunities, and each time he says, you know I love you. When Jesus asks the question, do you love me more than these? This goes back to the upper room story, where Peter announces that he loves Jesus more than these, pointing to the other disciples. In other words, I love you better than anybody else here. Yet he denies Jesus 3 times. It's for he's trying to save his own life at that point in time. Well, when Jesus asks the question, do you love me more than these? he's once again giving Peter an opportunity to confirm what Peter had said before. So the more than these goes back to his willingness to lay down his life for Jesus, because Peter will lay down his life for Jesus. And that comes in the second part of this story. Jesus at one point in time says that the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And by the first part of the story gives Peter the opportunity to confirm that he is now willing to do what he was unwilling to do before, and that is lay down his life for Jesus, lay down his life for the cause of the gospel. Jesus had said previously in chapter 14, "They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them." This, again, is a verse that has to do with Jesus' promises that are now fulfilled. He has revealed himself to the disciples once again. Okay, verse 19 makes a prediction of Peter's martyrdom. And it takes the form of a short parable, a teaching form common in the Gospel according to John. A lot of scholars see in the expression, "you will stretch out your arms," as a specific reference to Peter being crucified. Your arms are stretched out. You'll remember by tradition, Peter was crucified upside down because he said he was unworthy to be crucified the same way as Jesus was crucified. So there is no question that Peter was crucified, and it is highly likely that he was crucified upside down. The Romans would have gotten a big kick out of doing that to him. There's another word that is used, zoneo, which is translated dress. Others will dress you. It can also mean others will gird you. But it can also be an allusion to the binding of a criminal on their way to the execution. And if stretching out your arms has to do with that execution, then it would mean that it would be in line with what John has already said. Part of stabilizing a person on the cross, part of confirming the person on the cross, is to tie the person's arms to the cross. If they had crucified Peter upside down, they would have likely also tied his legs to the cross just to keep him on the cross and not fall off, because the weight is shifted in a different direction. So and at that point in time, Peter no longer has freedom. And this is what Jesus says: when you were a youth, you could go wherever you want to, but in your older age, you will have no ability to do that. And this would again be an allusion to Peter being arrested, bound and nailed to a cross. Peter is able to do what he could not do before, and that is he is now able to lay down his life in love, just as the good shepherd was willing to do that. Peter, like the beloved disciple, is to be known for his share in Jesus' love. There's a lot of question because the beloved disciple is mentioned here as well. And there's a contrast in what happens to the beloved disciple and what happens to Peter. Jesus says that the beloved disciple gets to live, Peter gets to die. And says to Peter, what's it to you? What happens to the beloved disciple? The question in John's gospel is, who is this beloved disciple? And there are many different speculations. One is that the beloved disciple might have been one of the sons of Zebedee, one of the sons of Zebedee. It might have been John Mark. There's a whole bunch of possibilities. Another possibility that's suggested is that you and I, are that beloved disciple. That John, the gospel writer, paints you and me into the story of the gospel. And in this sense, you and I are not necessarily going to be martyred because of our faith, but we're in this story, and because the beloved disciple gets to live and continue proclaiming the gospel of Jesus. And if this is the case, then you and I, our job is to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. That's the job of the beloved disciple and you and I, if we are that beloved disciple. If that's in fact what happens, then we have a job. And it's a job that's inserted right into the very identity of the beloved disciple. I like that interpretation, that we are part of the story. If that is the case, it's a very Jewish kind of perspective, because the Jewish people, no matter when in time they were living, saw themselves as part of the enslaved Jews in Egypt, saw themselves as part of the wandering Arameans, saw themselves in the story of the salvation of the Israelites, saw themselves in the story of the exile, saw themselves in the story of the Maccabee Revolution. So it's a very Jewish perspective to see yourself in the story. And if this is John's perspective, painting you and me into the story, it would be right on spot. The Jewish people didn't really see time as a linear item, like there's a beginning over here and an end over here. They saw it as a kind of spiral thing, so that any event that's in the center, as we spiral up, we're still near that event. We never lose track of that event, which is why they could see themselves in the Passover story. They could see themselves in the enslavement and so on. So I think it's highly possible that John's intent was for you and me to see ourselves as the beloved disciples. The passage ends once again with these words. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. In verse 24, this is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. So this chapter ends similarly to the way chapter 20 ends, with a recount that Jesus did many more things, and that the scroll of the gospel according to John could not contain all of those stories. So the gospel according to John is a story about how we can come to faith, how we can believe in something that we have not seen. It's a story about how God's purpose is fulfilled through the sending of the Logos, the divine Logos, the Son of God, Jesus, the Savior. How God's purpose is fulfilled through that epiphany, and that by our faith, our own destiny is fulfilled, our own eternal destiny is fulfilled. So the gospel according to John, hopefully all of us will get a chance to reread it many times in our lives. Hopefully each time we read it, we will see something new, something that we missed before. It's always good to take a look at a commentary. There are things on YouTube that you can look at. There are things on Wikipedia that you can look at, articles about the gospel according to John. All of those are helpful tools as you read the gospel according to John. So that's what I would suggest that we all do. Continue to struggle with this document, this most important document that has the power to inspire faith. Next week, we will take a look at one of my favorite parables. We will live stream that, and so we won't be starting up a new book of the Bible, but taking a look at a parable. And I'm likely to pick the parable of the Good Samaritan for next week. So with that in mind, I will see you soon. I will be doing a devotional tomorrow. The devotional will be at 9 a.m. We'll live stream at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then what we'll do is it'll be on the video so that you can watch it anytime thereafter. I've got as Steve Harvey would say, and I've got a good one for you tomorrow. Thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you.